all of us will suffer the loss of a loved one in our lifetime. And in this episode, I'll be talking about my experiences reconnecting with loved ones that I've lost in the astral plane. By the way, it was nothing like I thought it would be. So let's get into it. It had been maybe a year or two after the first time I'd left my body. That night, I'd gone to bed, and at some point, I heard the sound of chains dragging on the floor. Now, I should just give you this picture because I want you to know that when I was that age, I always slept with the door open. And for me, it was a matter of feeling secure, I guess. Just feeling like, my mom was right next door. So having the door open made me feel secure, made me feel that everything was okay. And when I heard the sound, I sat up, but I sat up out of my body. So if you can imagine that my body was sleeping and my spirit sat up. And when it did, through my open door, I saw what I can only explain to you to be a mass of blue, like a form. It was almost a human form, but it was glowing and it was blue. It was actually kind of beautiful, to be completely honest with you. But it moved across my room as if it were walking. It wasn't floating. And I do believe it had chains around it, which I found quite strange. For those of you who have either seen or read A Christmas Carol, the spirit of Christmas past, I believe, had the chains around. That's kind of the picture you want to get. It wasn't, exactly like that, but that is the picture I kind of want you to kind of see in your mind, except for, as I said, this mass of blue, glowing blue, past my room, and I couldn't see a face or anything. So I got up, still out of my body, and I started going down the hallway toward the kitchen. Of course, at that time, I didn't know. I had no idea what I was going to see. I mean, I was just like, what is that thing? And I want to see what it is. So as I arrived in the kitchen, I saw a lady. Now, this lady was older. She was black. She was small, short, maybe 5 foot, 5'1". I mean, I don't remember. She was a tiny little thing. I mean, I guess I'm giving you heights to kind of give you sort of an image, but I'm not sure exactly what height she was. She was dark-skinned, and I do remember that she had a mole, either on her cheek or near her lips. I remember there was a mole, and when she saw me, the first thing she did was she started talking to me about my mother. She started asking me all these questions. How's your mother doing? How's the family doing? All these things. Now, if you can just imagine, I just kind of was like, okay, I don't know this person. I have no idea who this is. She's asking me all these questions. But hey, I don't know. I'll respond. So I told this older lady that my mom was fine, everything was okay. And I don't remember many of the specifics of our conversation. I just remember there were a lot of questions and about the family and things of that nature. Again, at 10 or 11 years old, and I'm just a little kid and I'm just answering questions. It's like, I'm not sure why this, at that point, looking up to this adult is asking me all these questions about my mom and stuff, but I was okay answering those questions. I felt fine with it. At some point, in this conversation, she stopped and suddenly she grabbed my hands or my wrist. I remember which one it was. It could have been my wrist or my hand, somewhere around there. And she basically said, and I'm paraphrasing this, I'm not exactly sure what her exact words were, but that this was the end of our conversation. This was the end. And when she grabbed me, it startled me. And it startled me enough to be drawn back into my body. I opened my eyes, looked around, and, of course, I was in my room, and that experience was done. But I want to tell you that not too long after this had occurred, I spoke to my mom about it. Now, the relationship between my mom and I were very, very close, and I had begun to tell her about these experiences, and she'd always been open to it. And in fact, she'd had her own experiences. So I suppose in a way it was maybe passed down to me in some sense. But when I told her about this lady and I described this person to her, she said it sounded like perhaps a sister of her mother, which is my grandmother, or someone along that line. I don't remember what her exact words were, but I do believe, even though it wasn't 100%, I do believe, and I believe my mother believes this too, that this was a relative, this was a loved one that had passed, and perhaps she had just come back to check on my mom. This next experience is very intimate to me. I haven't really shared it with many people other than my mother and perhaps some people that I really trust. But in this episode, I think it's important to share it with you. I really do. No matter how, no matter how difficult it might be for me to kind of put it out there. So I have to tell you, and I kind of want to talk about this first, so please be patient, because I want to kind of give you some context with this and my grandmother. People have different relationships with their grandparents, but with my grandmother, I was extremely close. I remember so much about her, but mostly it's about her strength. I always saw her as a being that was extremely strong, someone that I could lean on. When I was a child, I always felt safe with her. And my first memory with my grandmother, believe it or not, I can remember her picking me up out of the cradle. That is the first memory I've ever had. The first. So my grandmother was very important to me. She'd make homemade ice cream or she'd tell me stories, and I absolutely, absolutely loved it. I did. But as we all know, all of us, everyone listening to the sound of my voice knows this. Our time on this planet is limited, everyone. And this includes those that we love deeply. My grandmother, I loved her so much. And eventually, she passed. And it was a difficult time for me because it was the first person that I ever lost that was close to me. I still remember going to the funeral. And the one thing that I remember about the funeral, and it stayed with me, and I don't know if my mother knows this, perhaps she does, was that, we were sitting probably in the first or second row. I don't remember exactly. And I remember the viewing. I remember seeing my grandmother, and she looked so different. She did. She didn't look anything like she looked in life. And I will always remember the words my mother said to me, which was, she said, son, that is not your grandmother. That is not your grandmother. She's gone. She's passed away. That's her shell, but that is not her. This stayed with me. This memory has always been with me. And some years later, after this had done, probably, many years later, I had begun to kind of think about what it would be like to contact her on the other side, to have a conversation with her, to see her again. It was tough, though. I mean, you would imagine that seeing a loved one would be very easy. I mean, you'd be able to go and see them and, hey, I miss you. Hey, I love you, that kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, it was difficult for me to do it. But one night, I'd gone to bed with the intent of seeing my grandmother who had passed. And, well, let me tell you. So I've done an episode about moving through the astral plane with the power of thought. And I've also said that flying and moving with the power of thought are different. I didn't really get into the fact that there can be a combination of the two. So in other words, you could be flying, and if you're thinking about someone, you could be being drawn to that person. And that's exactly what happened. I jumped into the air out of my room and I was flying, and I was thinking about my grandmother, and I was thinking about how much I loved her. By the way, when you love someone, it is one of the strongest forces that will pull you to them, truly. So, my suggestion is if you do want to do this, that you use that you think about how much you love someone. And I thought about it. And instantly, I wasn't over the neighborhood that I was in. I mean, I live in Southern California now. And at that time, I'd been living in Southern California. But I was born in Chicago. And suddenly, I was in Chicago. I was over what I thought was a familiar area. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And I remember looking down, and everything had been damp. It was your typical neighborhood in Chicago. Typical. There was an elementary school that I could see kind of in the distance. But the one thing I do remember is how moist everything seemed to be, as if it had just stopped raining. And I was being drawn toward this school, right? Because again, remember I told you that when you think of something, it draws you toward it. And I was being drawn toward this school. So I sat down from the air. I flew into this school. And as I came in for a landing, the bell had rung and all these kids started coming out. And of course, they didn't see me. They were walking right by me as if I wasn't there. But I want to tell you that there were 2 or 3 kids that were standing near the doorway where all these kids were pouring out of, and they were looking at me. They were looking at me, and they were looking kind of past me, towards whatever it was that was behind my back. And I find it curious, I did an episode on first contact and how I believe we should treat spirit beings on the other side. And one of the reasons why I did that episode is because when I've had contact with spirit beings and I'm in my astral body, they look no different than how we look when we're walking around in the 3D world. You don't see the difference. The only way you know that someone is a spirit being is if they can see you. Other than that, there doesn't seem to be any difference. And these two or three, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 kids, they were looking at me. They could see me, and they were looking past me. So I turned to see who they were looking at that was behind me, because I could tell they were also looking in that direction. And it was this little girl. She had her hair pulled back into a ponytail, and she had the top of her hair was like a curl, like a fang. I don't know how to describe it. This is so interesting. I mean, maybe someone in the audience that's listening to this knows as a woman what I'm trying to say. It's like a little curl in the front, and then the hair was drawn back into the back like a ponytail. She was cute little girl. But the moment I saw her, I knew that this was my grandmother. I knew it. And this is the thing. This is what is so interesting about what I've experienced in the astral plane, the reality, as opposed to what I've seen in TVs and the movies. And, telepathy is always kind of described as, you hear a voice in your head. And I've had that before. When I've astral projected, I've had that. But at the same time, I've had this thing where if someone is communicating with me, they don't have to use words. I simply feel what their words are. I feel it if they're happy, sad, or whatever. I feel it if they miss me, or if they just want to have a conversation with me. They have a conversation with me through my feelings. Now, I don't know how to explain that verbally to you, but that is what happens. It's like your instincts, the things that guide you, your instincts, they're on like steroids. They're like 500,000% of what they are when you're in your body. And when you have a feeling, when you get a feeling, it's like a communication. Anyway, when I saw my grandmother, we didn't communicate through words. We communicated through feeling. And I'd gotten the sense that she missed me. But right after that, she kind of matter-of-factly, and I felt this again, in a way saying, is it your time? Is it time for you to come? Because she had come to take those girls to the other side. She had come to help them to cross over. By the way, what an amazing job for someone like my grandmother, who always loved kids, always cared for kids before she died. And this was perfect for her. I mean, I couldn't have thought of a more perfect thing for her to do on the other side, but to help beings, to help souls to cross over. And that's what she had come to do. And at the time, I said, no, I'm not going. It's not my time. And it's interesting because I had always thought, again, I'm going to do episodes on this one, because I thought that when you left your body that people could tell, beings could tell that you had a body, but that you were astral projecting. But in my experience, the evidence kind of shows, no, they can't tell whether you are having an astral projection experience or not. You look just like all the other spirit beings out there. So she kind of matter-of-factly asked me about it, said, hey, are you coming too? And I basically kind of explained to her, no, I still have a body, but one day I will see you again. In part 2, I'll be sharing more experiences with you, and these experiences are different. You're definitely going to want to check this out. So that's it for now. If you enjoy the content on this channel, please subscribe. And until next time, until part 2, take care.